Cowboy found Apache bruised beside the trail, and the print in ashes called forth justice. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jack Thompson was a cowboy, the kind of man who preferred the silence of the open plains to the noise of a bustling town. He had lived most of his life as a rancher, herding cattle through the harsh deserts and long, dusty trails of the West. His life was simple, and he was content. But that morning, something unusual would change the course of his quiet existence. As the sun barely began to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, Jack set out for a long ride, his horse's hooves stirring up the dry earth. He had a day of work ahead of him, rounding up strays and mending fences, but fate had other plans. As Jack traveled down the familiar trail that wound through the canyon, he noticed something strange in the distance. At first, it appeared to be just another stretch of the barren landscape, but as he drew closer, Jack saw a figure by the side of the trail. It was a young woman, lying motionless on the ground, her body bruised and battered. Her clothes were torn, and the faint traces of blood stained the earth beneath her. Her skin was a deep brown, her face etched with pain, but there was something about her that struck Jack, her resilience, even in the midst of such agony. He immediately pulled his horse to a stop, his heart pounding in his chest. Jack dismounted quickly and rushed to her side. She was Apache, he could tell by the faint markings on her skin. But what had happened to her? Why was she left here, alone and hurt? Jack checked her pulse, weak but steady, and gently turned her over. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she stared at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack leaned closer, his eyes softening. "I'm Jack. You're gonna be okay," he reassured her, though he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. He carefully lifted her into his arms and placed her on his horse, holding her steady as they made their way back to his ranch. As he rode, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play here. The Apache girl, with her haunted eyes and the strange circumstances surrounding her, was somehow connected to a deeper story, one that involved more than just a simple act of kindness. He could feel it in the way the wind whispered through the canyon, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Jack returned to his small cabin, settling the girl inside. He cleaned her wounds, offering what little care he could, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the mysterious print he had noticed earlier. It was made in the ashes near where she had been lying. Something told Jack that the truth of what had happened here would not be easily uncovered, but he was determined to find out. Little did Jack know, this act of compassion would lead to something much bigger than he had ever imagined. As he sat by her side, watching over her while she slept, the first stirrings of a storm began to roll across the horizon. Something was coming. And it was not just the weather. Jack sat quietly beside the Apache girl, whose name he had learned was Naya, as she slept peacefully in the small cabin. The crackling of the fire in the hearth was the only sound that filled the room, but Jack's mind was far from at ease. There was a strange weight in the air, as though something was coming, something beyond the woman's injuries and the small kindness he had offered. The print in the ashes from earlier still lingered in his mind, a mysterious symbol that seemed to hold the key to a larger story. Naya stirred slightly in her sleep, a pained sigh escaping her lips. Jack leaned forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her without disturbing her rest. He couldn't help but wonder who had done this to her and why. The night stretched on, and Jack found himself lost in thought. It was a few hours later, just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, that a noise outside caught his attention. His instincts kicked in, and he stood up, quietly moving toward the door. His hand reached for his rifle, but as he peered through the small crack in the door, Jack saw something that stopped him dead in his tracks. There, standing at the edge of his property, were figures figures he knew all too well. Apache warriors. Jack's heart raced as he quickly turned to check on Naya. She was still unconscious, unaware of the danger approaching. The warriors outside didn't seem to be in any hurry, but their presence was enough to raise the hairs on the back of Jack's neck. He knew that when the Apache came, it was for a reason. And that reason was never good for outsiders. Jack moved silently through the cabin, making sure his rifle was within reach as he prepared himself for what was to come. He didn't want to escalate things, but he knew that if these men meant harm, he had no choice but to defend himself, and Naya. The warriors outside didn't move much, but Jack could feel their eyes on him. He tried to calm his racing thoughts, but it was hard. His gut told him that Naya's presence here was not a coincidence, and now these men were here, standing like a silent, unmovable force outside his door. Jack knew that he couldn't keep Naya's presence a secret for much longer. They would find out, one way or another. The question was whether they would see him as a friend or an enemy. The sound of footsteps approaching the cabin sent a jolt through Jack's chest. He quickly grabbed his rifle and stepped to the door, ready for whatever might come next. When the door creaked open, Jack was met with the sight of an older man, his face lined with years of experience, standing in front of him. The man's eyes studied Jack with an intensity that made him feel as if his every move was being calculated. "You have a guess," the man said, his voice low but strong. Jack didn't say anything at first, unsure of how to respond. He simply nodded, his eyes flicking toward Naya, who was still resting in the cabin. The man followed his gaze, and then turned back to Jack. "She is Apache. Do you understand what that means?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Jack nodded again. "I do," he said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "She needed help." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you gave it. But you need to know that there are consequences for helping one of our people." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He had known this day might come, but it still didn't prepare him for the weight of the words. He didn't know what to say next. Before he could speak, the man continued. "You will have to answer for your actions. And your answer will be more than just words. If you want to protect her, you will need to stand by your choices." Jack's mind raced as he took in the man's words. He didn't know what was coming, but one thing was clear: his simple act of kindness had just set into motion a chain of events he couldn't control. The warriors outside were waiting for a sign, and Jack knew that what he did next would shape the fate of both himself and Naya. "What do you want from me?" Jack asked, his voice finally breaking through the tension. The man's eyes softened slightly, but the gravity of his presence remained. "Justice," he said simply. "Justice for her, and justice for the wrongs done." Jack stood frozen for a moment, processing the man's words. Then, as the silence between them stretched, Jack made a decision. He wouldn't back down. He had already chosen his side, and he wasn't going to let anything at all, take that away. Jack stepped back, his hand still resting on the doorframe as the Apache warrior's words echoed in his mind. The tension between them was palpable, the weight of what had just been said pressing heavily on Jack's chest. He didn't know what kind of justice the man was talking about, but he was sure it was something that would require more than just words. He had already chosen to help Naya, and now, whether he liked it or not, he was tied to her fate. Jack glanced over his shoulder at Naya, who still lay on the small cot, unaware of the confrontation taking place. He couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He had acted on instinct, helping her when she needed it most, but now he was faced with the consequences of that decision. The Apache warrior took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Jack's. "You've done something that no one here will forgive easily. But that's not why I'm here." Jack furrowed his brow, confused. "Then why are you here?" he asked, his voice steady despite the confusion that churned within him. The man's expression softened, but only slightly. "Because she is more than just a girl to us. She is part of a much larger story, one that is about to unfold. And you, Cowboy, have chosen to be a part of it." Jack's mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic words. The man turned and nodded toward the group of Apache warriors who had been waiting silently outside, their presence now undeniable. The warriors stood in a loose formation, their faces stoic, their postures exuding an authority that Jack could feel in his bones. "You need to understand, Cowboy," the man continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "The decision you've made is not just about helping a single person. It's about something much larger. The winds of change are blowing, and the print in the ashes you saw, well, that is just the beginning." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The ashes. He hadn't thought much of them at the time, but now he realized they were part of something much bigger than a simple mark on the ground. The warrior stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "What happens next is not in your hands. But if you stand with us, with her, be prepared for the storm that follows. Your life, your land, and everything you've known may be changed forever." Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what the warrior meant by the storm, but there was no turning back now. He had made his choice. As the warrior turned to leave, he gave Jack one final glance. "We will return tomorrow. Be ready." The door clicked shut as the man and his warriors disappeared into the early morning light. Jack stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, trying to process everything that had just happened. His mind kept returning to Naya, the girl who had been left for dead, and the strange connection he felt to her. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't planned on being a part of anything larger than his own ranching life. But now, he was in the middle of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. Jack turned slowly and walked back to Naya's side. She still slept, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. As he knelt beside her, he took a deep breath, preparing for whatever came next. He didn't know what justice the Apache warrior had been talking about, or what storm was coming. But Jack Thompson was ready to face whatever the future held. He had made his choice, and there was no going back. The next morning, Jack woke early, the weight of the previous day still heavy in his chest. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm golden light over the landscape, but there was no comfort in the quiet for Jack. He had known from the moment he helped Naya that his life was about to change, but now, with the Apache warrior's warning still echoing in his mind, he was more certain than ever that things were moving faster than he could keep up with. As he sat at the small wooden table in the cabin, sipping a cup of coffee, his thoughts kept drifting back to the print in the ashes. What did it mean? And why had the warrior spoken of a storm? Jack wasn't a man given to idle worry, but he could feel the tension in the air. He had made his choice to help Naya, but now he wondered if that decision was enough. He hadn't expected anything like this. Jack's fingers tapped nervously against the mug, and he turned his gaze toward Naya, still sleeping soundly on the cot. She hadn't stirred since the night before, and Jack was grateful for the peace it brought her. It was clear she needed rest, but Jack knew time was running out. The warriors would return. He had no idea when, but the truth of it was undeniable. Jack stood up, setting his mug down, and moved to the window, pulling back the rough curtain. Outside, the world was still, nothing unusual, nothing to suggest the storm that was coming. But he could feel it in his gut, like the calm before a thunderstorm. As Jack looked out over the horizon, a sound broke the silence, hooves, slow and deliberate. His heart skipped a beat as he turned, expecting to see the Apache warriors. Instead, there was only one man on horseback, riding slowly up the trail toward his ranch. Jack squinted, trying to make out the figure. As the man drew closer, Jack recognized him. It was the same warrior who had spoken to him the day before, the one who had warned him of the consequences of his actions. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the man approached. The warrior's expression was unreadable, but Jack could feel the weight of his presence as the man dismounted. "It's time," the warrior said simply, his voice low and steady. Jack didn't ask for an explanation. He had known this was coming. Without a word, he grabbed his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder, and stepped outside to meet the man. The warrior nodded toward the cabin, his eyes flicking briefly to where Naya still slept. She is waking. There is no more time to wait. Jack's heart tightened. He didn't want to drag Naya into whatever was coming, but he had no choice. She was already part of it. What do we do? Jack asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. The warrior's eyes locked onto Jack's with a fierce intensity. You stand with us. With her. The storm has already begun, Cowboy. The warrior's words hung in the air, heavy and final. Jack didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the man, trying to read something in his expression, something that would tell him what the next step would be. But there was nothing, only the warrior's unyielding gaze, and the knowledge that there was no turning back. Jack nodded slowly, a sense of resolve settling over him. He had made his choice. Now, he would stand by it, no matter what came next. As the warrior turned to lead the way, Jack followed, his mind racing. He had no idea what the storm would bring, but he was ready to face it. He had to be. Naya's life, and his own, depended on it. The air was thick with anticipation as Jack followed the Apache warrior through the rough terrain surrounding his ranch. The first rays of sunlight barely touched the earth, casting long shadows over the dusty ground. Jack's heart beat in his chest. Like a drum, the weight of the decision he had made settling heavier with each step. The warrior led him toward a small group of men waiting near a cluster of boulders, their presence a silent reminder that Jack was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something larger, something he didn't fully understand. As they reached the group, the warrior turned to Jack and spoke in a low voice. This is where we begin. The others will join us soon. There is no turning back now. Jack nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had already chosen his path, but the reality of it was sinking in. These men, these Apache warriors, had been part of a world Jack had never fully understood. He had lived his life on the outskirts of that world, but now it was pulling him in, and he had no choice but to follow. The warrior who had led him here stepped forward, raising a hand to signal the others. The rest of the Apache warriors, silent as ever, gathered around Jack, their eyes studying him with a mix of curiosity and respect. Jack felt the weight of their gazes, but he didn't flinch. He had come this far. The warrior who had spoken to him earlier turned to face the group and began to speak in their native tongue. Jack couldn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. The way the men listened, the way their faces remained stoic, told him everything he needed to know. This was serious. This was a decision that would change everything. After a few moments, the warrior stopped speaking and looked back at Jack. They are ready, he said, his tone steady. We will ride together to the valley. It is there that the storm will break. Jack's mind raced as he processed the words. The storm. What storm? And what role would he play in it? The warrior seemed to sense Jack's unease. You are not alone, he said, his voice low but reassuring. You stand with us. With her. Jack glanced toward Naya, who had quietly joined them, her presence a calm amidst the tension. She looked up at Jack, her dark eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Was it gratitude? Or something more? She hadn't spoken much since waking, but Jack knew she was a part of this. Just as much as he was. We ride to the valley now, the warrior said, his voice cutting through Jack's thoughts. The valley is where everything begins. You will see, Cowboy. The words hung in the air like a promise, one that Jack wasn't sure he was ready for. But there was no turning back. He had already made his choice. Jack mounted his horse, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The Apache warriors, led by the man who had spoken to him, formed a line behind him, their movements synchronized as they began to ride. The landscape around them seemed to grow more desolate with each passing mile, the dry, cracked earth stretching out before them like a wasteland. The silence was broken only by the steady rhythm of their horses' hooves. As they rode, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He looked around, scanning the horizon, but saw nothing. It was just the vast emptiness of the desert stretching out before them. Jack tried to focus on the ride, on the task at hand, but his thoughts kept returning to the warrior's words. The valley. The storm. What did it all mean? And why had he been chosen to be part of it? As they neared the valley, the air seemed to change. The wind picked up, swirling dust around them, and the sky darkened slightly, as if in response to the growing tension. Jack could feel the change in the air, the sense that something was about to happen, something that would alter the course of everything. The warriors ahead of him slowed their pace, and Jack followed suit. They had reached the edge of the valley. The ground here was softer, the air heavier with the scent of earth and sage. And as they entered the valley, Jack could see it. The print in the ashes. It was just as the warrior had said. The storm was coming, and there was no turning back now. As Jack and the Apache warriors entered the valley, the temperature seemed to drop, and a quiet sense of urgency filled the air. The vast expanse of the valley stretched before them, its rocky walls rising high on either side, casting long shadows over the landscape. The once calm air now felt charged, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. The warriors rode in a tight formation, their horses moving with practiced ease, but there was no mistaking the tension in their movements. They were all aware of what was coming. Jack's mind raced with questions, but there was no one to ask. The warrior who had spoken to him before rode at the front, leading the way with a quiet authority that Jack had come to respect. The others followed, their faces hard and unreadable, each of them focused on the task ahead. As they continued deeper into the valley, Jack's thoughts kept returning to the print in the ashes. What was its significance? And why had the warrior mentioned it? Was it a symbol of some kind of ritual? A marker for something far larger than he could understand? He couldn't be sure, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him. It wasn't just about Naya anymore. It wasn't just about helping a girl in need. This was something bigger, something that would affect more than just his small world. They had reached the center of the valley now, and Jack could see a small circle of stones ahead. The warriors slowed their horses, and Jack followed their lead. The air felt thicker here, as though the valley itself was holding its breath. The warrior in front dismounted, and the others followed suit. Jack hesitated for a moment before doing the same, his feet touching the soft earth as he looked around. The landscape was quiet, but it was a tense kind of silence, the kind that made Jack's skin prickle with unease. The warrior stepped forward, his eyes scanning the area as if he were searching for something. He nodded to Jack, signaling for him to follow. Without a word, Jack obeyed, his heart pounding in his chest as he approached the circle of stones. The warrior spoke then, his voice low and steady. "This is where it begins," he said. "The storm will come. But we must be prepared." Jack didn't fully understand, but the gravity in the warrior's voice was enough to make him realize that whatever was about to happen was far beyond anything he had ever experienced. The warriors gathered around the circle, their movements synchronized as they formed a loose perimeter. The warrior who had spoken to Jack earlier stood at the center, his hands raised in a silent gesture. Jack watched in silence, unsure of what was happening but feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a heavy cloak. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a chill through the valley. Jack could see the dust stirring in the distance, and he knew that something was coming. The warrior's voice broke the silence again, his words now carrying a sense of finality. The print in the ashes was not just a sign. It was a call. A call for justice. Jack's stomach tightened as the warrior's words sank in. This was it. The storm had arrived. And with it, the reckoning that had been set into motion the moment Jack had decided to help Naya. He could feel the tension building around him, the energy in the air growing thick with anticipation. The warriors were ready. Jack had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain: he was part of this now, whether he was ready or not. The warrior turned to face Jack, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "You have chosen your side," he said. "Now you must stand firm." Jack nodded, his jaw set. He had already made his choice, and there was no turning back now. As the wind picked up, Jack could feel the storm approaching, both in the sky and within the valley itself. The Apache warriors were ready for whatever came next, and Jack would stand with them. There was no turning back. The print in the ashes had called forth justice, and Jack Thompson was ready to answer that call. The silence of the valley was broken by the distant sound of hooves, a low thundering that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. The wind picked up again, swirling dust and debris around the small circle where Jack and the Apache warriors stood. The air felt heavy, charged with something Jack couldn't quite place. His heart beat faster as he watched the warriors, their faces solemn and their eyes focused on the distance. Jack turned toward the warrior who had been speaking to him, trying to steady his nerves. "What's happening?" Jack asked, his voice low. The warrior's expression remained unchanged as he looked back at Jack. "The call has been answered," he said simply. "The storm is here." Jack glanced around, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on him. There was no turning back. He had made his choice to stand with these people, but now the consequences of that decision were unfolding before him. The warriors tightened their formation, their bodies moving with quiet precision. Jack felt a pang of uncertainty, but he couldn't show it. Not now. The print in the ashes, the warriors' quiet determination, it was all coming together, but Jack still didn't understand what it all meant. What had Naya's presence here set in motion? And what was this storm that the warrior had spoken of? As the sound of hooves grew nearer, Jack tensed, instinctively gripping his rifle. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew it wasn't going to be easy. The warriors around him stood still, their faces unreadable, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The air was thick with anticipation. Jack tried to focus on his breathing, but his thoughts kept returning to Naya. What was her role in all of this? She had been the catalyst, the reason he had made the choice to help. And now, she was part of something far bigger than either of them had anticipated. The thundering hooves grew louder still, and Jack finally saw them, the riders. A group of Apache men, their faces painted in the traditional war paint, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. Jack felt his pulse quicken as they rode toward him, the dust swirling around their horses' hooves. They didn't slow down as they approached the circle. Instead, they continued to ride with purpose, their eyes focused and determined. As they reached the edge of the valley, they halted, dismounting in a single, fluid motion. The air seemed to hold its breath as the new arrivals stood in formation, their eyes scanning the warriors who had already gathered. Jack's gaze flicked between the two groups. It was clear that there was a tension in the air, but it wasn't a tension born of conflict. It was something else. Something that Jack couldn't quite understand. The leader of the new group stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the warrior who had led Jack to the valley. The two men exchanged a glance, and without a word, the leader nodded. The warrior who had been guiding Jack spoke then, his voice low but filled with authority. "It is time." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the exchange, but he didn't dare speak. He was a part of this now, and he knew better than to question what was happening. The leader of the new group turned his gaze toward Jack, his eyes intense and searching. "You have chosen your side," he said, his voice steady. "Now you must stand firm. There is no turning back." Jack nodded, the weight of his decision settling deeper into his bones. He had chosen, and now he had to see it through. As the warriors from both groups began to move into position, Jack's mind raced. What was coming next? The storm, the call for justice, it all seemed like something out of a legend. Jack wasn't a man of many words, but he understood one thing: this was bigger than him. Bigger than Naya. This was about something far deeper than just helping one person. As the two groups of warriors gathered, the tension in the air grew thick. Jack could feel the storm coming, not just in the sky but in the very ground beneath his feet. The call had been answered, and now the reckoning would begin. As the warriors from both groups gathered, the air grew thicker with anticipation, like the moment before a storm's first crack of thunder. Jack stood silently, his hand resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder, his heart pounding. He had made his choice, but now he was feeling the full weight of what that meant. The leader of the new group, the one who had locked eyes with the warrior who had brought Jack here, took a slow step forward. The other warriors moved aside, creating a path that led straight to Jack. Their eyes, once unreadable, now held a knowing intensity. It was clear that something significant was about to happen. The leader stopped in front of Jack, his eyes scanning him up and down. There was no hostility in the gaze, only a deep, piercing understanding. For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension hanging between them like a live wire. Jack was used to facing dangerous situations, but this felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something deeper. The leader spoke first, his voice low but commanding. "You have chosen your side, Cowboy. Now you must understand what that means." Jack didn't respond immediately. He had already accepted that. His choice was made, but the weight of the warrior's words sent a ripple of uncertainty through him. The leader continued, his tone firm but not unkind. "We ride together, but we also carry the burden of our choices. You are not here by chance. This is fate, and it will not let go easily." Jack looked down for a moment, the reality of his situation sinking in. He wasn't just standing in the middle of a valley with a group of Apache warriors. He was part of something far bigger, something that could change the course of everything he had known. The warrior who had guided Jack spoke again, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen much in his lifetime. "We are not just seeking justice for Naya. We are seeking balance, a reckoning that will affect more than just the land we stand on." Jack's mind raced. Balance. Reckoning. It all sounded like the beginning of a story that had been unfolding long before he had crossed paths with Naya. The leader of the warriors turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward the horizon. Jack followed his gaze, but all he saw was the vast emptiness of the valley stretching out before them. "The storm is coming," the leader said, almost to himself. "And when it breaks, there will be no more time for doubt." Jack nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had been thrust into this, but now there was no turning back. The warriors began to move into their positions, their actions smooth and practiced. They weren't just preparing for battle, they were preparing for something that had been set in motion long ago, a moment that had finally arrived. As Jack took his place alongside them, he could feel the weight of the choice he had made settling into his bones. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of this. And whatever happened next, he would stand by it. The leader of the warriors turned back to Jack, his eyes steady. "We are not just fighting for survival. We are fighting for the future, for the land, for the people who will come after us." Jack met his gaze, his voice steady as he spoke. "I understand," he said, his words carrying a weight of their own. The leader nodded once, then turned away, signaling for the others to begin moving. The warriors rode in a single, unbroken line, their horses' hooves thudding softly against the earth as they began their journey toward what awaited them. Jack followed them, his mind filled with the gravity of the path ahead. There was no turning back now. The storm had arrived, and it was time to face what had been set in motion. Jack didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to meet it head-on. He had made his choice, and now he would stand with the Apache warriors, come what may. As the warriors moved in a steady, determined line, Jack's heart continued to pound in his chest. The journey ahead was unclear, but every step they took toward the distant hills seemed to solidify the purpose of their mission. Jack had no illusions. This wasn't just a fight for survival, or even justice. It was something bigger. Something that would reshape the lives of everyone involved. The valley began to narrow as they moved deeper into the heart of it. The once expansive space now felt more confined, the rocks on either side of them looming taller, closing in like walls. The air was thick with dust, and Jack could feel the dryness in his throat as he rode alongside the Apache warriors. They didn't speak much, their faces set in expressions that Jack had come to recognize as serious, focused, and resolute. Every man seemed to know his place, and their movements were coordinated without the need for words. Jack looked at Naya, who rode just behind him. She had been silent since their arrival, her gaze fixed ahead, but Jack could feel the weight of her presence beside him. She was part of this, too. In some way, more than anyone, she was the reason they were all here. Without her, none of this would have come to pass. Jack wanted to ask her what she thought about the storm that had been building, but he knew she was still processing everything, just as he was. Instead, he focused on the path ahead, watching the warriors as they rode in perfect formation. The leader of the group, the one who had spoken to Jack most often, rode at the front, his movements calm and deliberate. Jack had noticed that this man rarely spoke unless necessary, but when he did, his words carried the weight of experience. Jack had come to respect him, even if he didn't fully understand the significance of his words or the role he played in the coming events. As they reached the crest of a small rise, Jack could see the edge of the valley stretching out before them. A distant ridge loomed, and beyond it, the land seemed to open up into a vast expanse of empty wilderness. The leader slowed his horse, signaling for the others to halt. Jack followed suit, his eyes scanning the horizon. This was the point of no return. They were close. Jack could feel the change in the air, the tension mounting. Something was about to happen. The warrior at the front dismounted, and the others followed. Jack hesitated for a moment before dismounting as well, his feet landing softly on the dry earth. The group gathered around, their faces unreadable, but their presence was unmistakably commanding. The leader turned to face the group, his eyes scanning the faces of each warrior, then resting on Jack. "This is the moment," he said, his voice carrying a quiet power. "The storm is here. We stand together." Jack could feel the weight of the words, the finality in them. This wasn't just a battle, it was the beginning of something that would change everything. He had no idea what lay beyond the ridge, but the air seemed to hum with anticipation. The warriors stood still, their horses grazing nearby, the only sound the faint rustling of the wind. Jack looked back toward Naya, who was now standing beside him, her expression unreadable. He couldn't tell what was going through her mind, but he knew one thing for sure: they were in this together. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The leader nodded once, signaling for the group to move forward. With a single motion, the warriors mounted their horses again and began to ride. Jack followed, his heart still racing, but now with a sense of purpose. They were headed into unknown territory, but Jack was ready. He had made his choice. And there was no turning back. As they rode, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on them. They were part of something far greater than themselves, part of a larger story that had been unfolding for generations. The storm was coming, but Jack would stand firm. Side by side with Naya and the Apache warriors, ready to face whatever came next.